During the time that Israel was divided, God told a prophet named Elijah that there would be a drought in the land. He directed Elijah to leave the area and live by himself for 3 years near a ravine where he would have all the water he needed. One day, God told Elijah to go and confront King Ahab and his wife Jezebel about leading the Israelites to worship a false god named Baal. Elijah asked Ahab and all the people of Israel to meet him on the top of a mountain. Ahab brought 450 prophets of Baal with him. Elijah decided to conduct a challenge to prove that he followed the true God. 2 bulls were brought to be sacrificed. The prophets of Baal laid down pieces of wood and put the bull on it, but did not set fire to it. "Call on the name of your God," Elijah challenged, "and I will call on mine. Whichever answers by fire, he is God." From early morning until noon, the prophets asked their god Baal to send fire, but nothing happened. Elijah taunted them, "Shout louder! Perhaps your God is in deep thought or sleeping." So they shouted louder and cut themselves with their swords and spears, but still nothing happened. He quickly built an altar using 12 stones, one to represent each tribe of Israel. Finally, he asked those around him to pour water all over the bull and the wood. There was so much water flowing that it filled the trench around the altar. Then Elijah called out, "Let it be known today that you are God in Israel." And fire fell from the sky and burned up the bull, the wood, and even the stones and soil, vaporizing all the water around it. The prophets of Baal were then arrested and killed in the valley below the mountain. When King Ahab returned home and told his wife Jezebel what happened, she was furious and sent word to Elijah that she was going to have him killed. So Elijah fled to the wilderness. There he met an angel sent by God to take care of him, who gave him food and water. Eventually, God told Elijah that Elisha would take his place as a prophet in Israel. Not long after, Elijah and Elisha were walking along the road, and a chariot and horses made of fire appeared out of nowhere and took Elijah up into the sky. So Elisha continued to do God's work, performing miracles, and at one point even raising a young boy from the dead. Elijah stretched out his body over the boy and caused him to sneeze 7 times, bringing him back to life. For many years after, God continued to use Elisha and a number of other prophets to perform miracles and warn the Israelites of all that would happen to them if they did not follow God. Despite the prophets' warnings, the next several kings led Israel further and further from God. It was only a matter of time before things had to change.
Warning labels are everywhere, right? Like, everybody's worried about being sued, so they stick a warning label on every single thing. I was doing a little digging on the internet, the font of all wisdom this week, and I discovered there's an organization right here, even in Michigan. It's an anti-lawsuit organization that actually keeps track of unnecessary warning labels as a way to show the impact on businesses of these frivolous, ridiculous lawsuits that come up. And so on this website, there was a lot of examples of unnecessary warnings. One of them, they had a picture of a tractor. They had a warning label on it that just said, "Caution, avoid death." So that's all encompassing, right? Just includes everything. Like, you just don't want to die. So that's, like, I liked it. That's always good advice. They had a picture of a stroller with the warning label on it that said, "Warning, remove infant before folding stroller for storage." And that's good heads up, you young parents, many of you. Hope you heard that. I thought this one was funny. They had a Batman costume that said, "Warning, cape does not enable user to fly." I mean, that's just ridiculous. Right? Everybody knows Batman doesn't fly, right? It's Superman is the one that flies, right? It's just ridiculous. There was a sign, not on this website, but I saw a sign one time that said, "Touching wires causes instant death, $200 fine." So, like, Like, if you touch these and die, it's going to cost you. Right? If sudden death doesn't get you, maybe the $200 fine will. There are a lot of signs. I was watching the news this morning, and I don't know the specific one, but there's a beach in Los Angeles that they showed pictures. There are warning signs like everywhere on this beach to not go in the water because evidently the Los Angeles River or something over there had spilled some toxic stuff and it emptied into this body of water, whatever it was. And so they put all these signs, don't swim, don't swim, don't swim. Like, guess what there are a bunch of Californians out there doing? They were swimming. I think probably the situation is that we become so accustomed to these signs, we kind of just become numb to them. Just a lot of warning signs. Now, what we do know is that the bad thing is that there are some warning signs that we really need to pay attention to, but we just sort of have this habit of neglecting them. But sometimes if we ignore these warnings, it can lead to some pretty devastating consequences. But again, there are just so many of them, they're just so easy to overlook, and so we don't pay that much attention. As we turn to chapter 15 this week in the story, there were some prophets who are called messengers. And their job most of the time was to warn the people about things that they were in danger of because of things that they were doing. They would hear from God, these prophets, and they would speak on God's behalf, and they would say to the people, you need to turn around. Like you can't keep going down this path if you don't make some changes. Let me tell you where this is going to head for you. And so we need to pay attention to what they said to the nations of Israel and Judah. And these are very, very serious things. So we're going to look at some of these different prophets. We're going to be actually considering several of these over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. We're going to look at Elijah and Elisha and Isaiah and Jeremiah. We're going to look at some prophets that maybe you're a little bit more familiar with, but maybe also some that you're not quite as familiar with. And so we're in chapter 15 of the story. I'm not going to have page references in the story. I'm not going to have scriptures on the screen because what I'd really like for you to do is grab a Bible and turn to 1 Kings. We're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 16 and 18 and 19, but first of all in 1 Kings chapter 16. Now, last week, just by way of review, we spent some time studying the nation of Israel and how the nation of Israel, God's people, was kind of split into two kingdoms. There was the northern kingdom, and then there was the southern kingdom. And Jeroboam was the first king of the northern kingdom after God's people split. And the capital of the northern kingdom was Israel. And if you recall, Jeroboam was the king of the northern kingdom, and Rehoboam was the king of the southern kingdom, which would have been Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. But God's people are divided into two separate nations at this point. The northern nation, the northern kingdom of Israel is much, much stronger, much more military might because they've got more people. The smaller kingdom of Judah was not quite as powerful. But we read that various kings, a long line of kings, came to rule in both parts of this divided kingdom. And by and large, they're really, really, they're just horrible kings. They're not godly kings. Not only that, but they just do despicable things. There are a few good kings that come along, but by and large, they're bad. And so God is like, I need to get messages to my people, but I can't speak my word through these horrible kings. And so he taps these people, these prophets. Now, most of these prophets who speak God's word to the people on God's behalf, like most of them, they're just normal people. They were going about their business, just kind of doing their thing. Like they weren't like professional prophets. They didn't go to prophet school or anything. But God tapped people that he could trust to get the message to the people. And one of the worst kings was King Ahab. And so, for example, in 1 Kings 16, starting in verse 29, here's what we read about Ahab. It says, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria over Israel for 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. And so Ahab is this evil king. Idolatry has just gotten him it has just gotten out of control under his reign. And the people are, not only are they worshiping in the high places, which is a sign of pagan worship, but they just are all over the place worshiping these man-made idols. And part of the problem, as you might guess, part of the problem was his wife. Actually, a large part of the problem was his wife. His wife was Jezebel. Like not a Jezebel, but this is the Jezebel from which all the other Jezebels get their name, right? This is the original Jezebel. Now, she was the princess of the Sidonians, and she came on the scene, and she wanted to build a temple and an altar for her god, the god of Baal. And Baal was the god of weather. And so you can imagine such a culture that relied on agriculture. They were very, very beholden to this god that they thought controlled the weather, the god of Baal. And so, or Baal, the god. And so this was very, very important. And the cult of Baal, the temple of Baal was a very, very prominent thing in those days. Well, Elijah the prophet, God taps Elijah, says, you need to do something about it. So Elijah goes to King Ahab, and he says, here's a message. Here's a message from the living God. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. He says, not only will there be no rain, but there's not even going to be any dew on the grass. Like, it's going to be bone dry. There's going to be a horrible drought. That's how dry it's going to be. And everybody's going to know that God is God and that the Lord is God. And he was hoping that would turn the people away from the ridiculous worship of this false god. So Elijah gives this message to King Ahab. And one of the things you'll see as we study these prophets is this is a constant theme of the prophets. In many ways, you could say this is the theme of the Old Testament, and that is idolatry. Idolatry. It is the number one problem in Scripture. The first 2 of 10 commandments deal with idolatry. There are more than 1,000 verses that speak to it. It's one of only 4 commandments that has the death penalty attached to it in the 10 commandments. And God takes idolatry very, very seriously. You say, well, why is that? Why is this such a big deal? Well, we probably can venture a guess. I mean, we're sitting here in church on a Sunday morning, but remember what we've seen is that the story is all about the glory of God, right? The story, the narrative, the chronological interaction of God with his people is all about wanting to demonstrate and to manifest his glory. That's what it's about. Your story and my story, the story, it's all about reflecting the glory of God. So when there's idolatry, the glory of God is being robbed from him and it's being given to another, right? That's basically what idolatry is. And God, as you can imagine, has a big, big problem with that. So that's why we read a ton about this in the Old Testament, specifically the prophets. But again, we tend to just kind of skip over it because it just doesn't seem that relevant to us. You go to trips or you take trips to certain countries and you'll see idolatry in the form of real idols, like wood carvings and different things. And in Jamaica, there were some really, really strange, and I can't even mention what they were, but really, really strange, vile focuses of idolatry that people had made. But you think, well, like, I don't have carved statues that I bow down to and worship. I'm not bowing down to golden images. And we say, so what does this have to do with us? It just doesn't seem to relate to us in this modern, sophisticated day and time. But the problem is that our hearts and the human heart really hasn't changed at all. And we're still prone to go chasing after idols. Maybe our idols just look a little bit different. See, the question is, where do you put your ultimate hope, right? What holds that seat of glory on the throne of your life? And for many of us, at various times in our lives, all of us, at one time or another, we have a tendency to look to someone else or something else other than the Lord God to fill that position in our life. It could be entertainment. It could be a spouse. A lot of people, it's money. It could be a lot of different things. And so I want to just spend a few minutes just identifying some of the idols that we might have in our lives. And remembering that the role of a prophet is to help people recognize the reality of idolatry in their own lives. And so that's what we want to do. And I just want to tell you before we go through this that I pretty much spent all week going through this list on my own regarding myself. Like I don't just want to come and preach this to you, but I've already been convicted of it myself as we go through these. And kind of this list comes from the 1600s. There was an English Puritan preacher named David Clarkson. And he's the one that originally came up with this sort of series of questions to help us identify the idols that might be in our hearts. And so I've kind of reframed them a little bit for more current for our time and place. But I want you again to think about these and in just your head and your heart, answer these questions. Because how you answer these questions, like it has the potential to maybe usurp God on the throne of your life and be a competition to him. All right? Are you excited? You're like, Chris, isn't your battery going to go dead now? Like, no. Like, Mark's charging the other pack. I'm good for another couple hours. But here's the first question. Think to yourself, what are you most disappointed with, like right now in your life? What are you most disappointed with? Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's your financial status. Maybe it's your family. Perhaps it's maybe your marriage. What are you most disappointed with? And a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times what we find ourselves most disappointed with points to something that maybe we've put our ultimate hope in, or maybe at least we've put a little too much hope in it. Instead of putting our hope in God, we put our hope in this or that. And when it doesn't work out, we live with this sense of disappointment and despair and sometimes depression. Now, understand me again, some disappointment in life is natural. Like things are not always going to work out like we want them to. That's not what I mean. But I'm saying what might be just sort of a constant disappointment in your life. Hey, here's another way to question it. This is how I asked myself, what do you find yourself complaining the most about? Right? God kind of put that question in my mind. Went to the whiteboard. Many of you know I just love writing on whiteboards, and it looks like hieroglyphics when I write up there. But I wrote just a list of things that I complain about. Had to wipe it off. Needed more room. Started writing up there again. But what do you find yourself complaining most about? What we complain about often and frequently has a way of revealing where we've put our hope in something that has maybe replaced God some way in your life. Here's another question. This is a little more obvious. What do you sacrifice your time and your money for? What do you sacrifice for? That's how you know perhaps what or who your God is. Do you sacrifice time and money for the Lord God, or do you sacrifice time and money for whatever else? It could be a whole host of things. Maybe it's a person, or maybe it's a job, or maybe it's your home or a car. What do you engage in sacrifice for in a sacrificial, meaningful way? Now, again, we need money to live. We need a home. We need a car. We need a lot of those things. But I think you know what I'm talking about. Does it consume you beyond what is necessary and beyond what gives you a sense of pleasure, but almost to an obsession? What do we spend our time and our money on? That's a whole sermon in and of itself. You probably know the great verse Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there is your heart." Also, and so if you want to know perhaps what or who you worship, look at how you spend your money and your time. It might reveal some gods within your hearts. Here's another question. What do you worry about? And what do you most often worry about? And what, if you were honest with yourself, what just scares you? What do you maybe you wake up in the middle of the night and you've had a dream, or you're covered with sweat, or what is it that scares you? Maybe you think to yourself, I don't know what I'd do if I lost that person, or if this thing happened to my kid or whoever. I don't know. I don't think I could handle it. What worries you? What scares you? Another question, where do you go when you get hurt? This is the most obvious one, I believe, for our day and time. This is a big one. Where do you go when life gets hard? Sometimes people will put it, psychologists kind of people will put it, where do you turn to medicate yourself when you're feeling down? I'm not talking necessarily about drugs or prescriptions. I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Where do you go to find comfort? Maybe you come home after a long day. You open up the refrigerator, and there's some comfort food, right? That's a big one. A lot of us have that problem. I mean, it's like, that's why we call it comfort food, right? It's right there. It is what it is. Instead of turning to God, we help ourselves feel better, maybe by eating, or maybe for some people it's drinking, or you're hurting and you just want to stop. And so maybe is this too often the case, so often the case, maybe you go into a pagan temple of an explicit website or something like that, and you medicate the hurt that you have. I'm just saying, where do you tend to turn for comfort when you are hurting? Kind of shows where you might put your hope. When we go to something or someone other than God, first and primarily with our hurts and the pain of life, it has a way of revealing that maybe has become an idol, whatever it is, not only that you're hurting about, but the thing that you're doing to try and cope with it. I was having this conversation with somebody not too long ago about a thing going on in their life, and I asked them this question. I said, what do you turn to when you're feeling down, when you're feeling hurt? Where do you turn to instead of God? And they said something I didn't really expect, but I expect that it's a problem many times that we don't really want to talk about. They said, well, Chris, what if it's God that I'm hurting about? What if it's God I'm having a problem with? He's like, what do we do when we're upset or angry and maybe we're disillusioned or disappointed with God? Where do we turn to then? That's a great question. What I told him to do and what I have tried to do myself, because I think we all have had those moments where we just don't know. We're hurting, and maybe we don't understand why God is doing this or allowing this or whatever it might be. And so the question that I would ask is, well, what is it that has made you feel this way toward God? Like when God doesn't deliver for us like we think he should, like what is it that is so important that you might find yourself disappointed and angry with God? Now, the good thing is, and hopefully you've heard me say this many times because I have, is that you can be angry and upset with God. God can take that. God understands human emotion. All right? It's not a sin to have times when we just are angry with God. Building on that, question number 5 is, again, well, what is it that makes you mad? What is it that makes you angry, right? Maybe you're, like, I don't know, just throwing this out there, maybe your beloved college basketball team, like, loses in the first round of the tournament or second when they're supposed to have won the whole thing, like something important. Like, what do you do? What do you do then, right? What makes you angry? Maybe somebody disrespects you, or maybe somebody doesn't treat you the way that you ought to be treated, and it makes you angry because maybe you have people's respect for you as one of your idols. Maybe you care just a little bit too much what a certain person or group of people or whoever thinks about you, and when they disrespect you, it makes you angry. It makes you mad. Kind of on the flip side of that, the 6th question is, what brings you the most joy? What makes you laugh? Now, this is where it gets a little bit challenging. Because admittedly, there are a lot of things that give us joy, and there's nothing wrong or evil with them. But in fact, those can be gifts from God, good gifts from God. But instead of allowing these gifts to draw us closer to God and to be thankful to God and to just thank God, we allow these gifts to become competition for him. And so instead of worshiping the giver of whatever it is that's bringing us joy and pleasure, we tend to focus our attention from the giver onto the gift. And it becomes too important in our life. Instead of rejoicing in the Lord with those things, maybe we allow these things to replace him. I could go down a whole long list of examples I have seen of this over the years in other people as well as in myself. But it's a good question to think. Again, God wants us to be happy. God wants to bless us. God wants us to be joyful. But as long as we're not exchanging our glory, our worship, not exchanging the worship of the giver for the worship of the gift. Here's the last one. Whose applause do you long for? Whose approval are you really living for? Right? Maybe it's a boss, or maybe it's a spouse. Maybe it's a parent or a friend. Who are you living for? And whose applause you're living for tells you a lot about who might just be on the kind of the throne of your heart in terms of how you orient your decisions in your life and how you think about things. But ultimately, an idol, how are you answering these questions? An idol is anything or anyone that takes, other than God, that takes the passion and the value and the hope and the glory and the commitment and sits on the throne of your life. So an idol then is just kind of this cheap substitute for God. Now, we don't know that sometimes right off. Idols can look very, very convincing and necessary, and they can do things and make us feel certain ways that are very, very tricky. And so we need to be careful with them, but we need to ask ourselves, is there something in my life that is taking the place of where God should be? Now, I think that this is kind of in our human frailty of life. I do believe this is one of the effects, one of the marks of the fallenness of us, right? Because I think that over our lives, we'll struggle with this at various times. Like, I don't think it's just, okay, that's my idol, I'm going to conquer that and I'm good. I think at different seasons in our life, we're more susceptible to different things that might want to take the place of God in our life. And this is why it's so important that we stay plugged into God's word, that we come to church and the community and we're reminded once again that, no, it's God who deserves the throne. It's God who is priority in our life. You see, it's so easy to forget those things if we find ourselves kind of floating away from community, floating away from regular engagement with his word. It becomes very, very hard to hold on to those things, especially in our society. But things can become a replacement for God. I want to confess something to you right now, that for many, many years, I have been addicted to, and it's not easy for me to say this, but I have been addicted to Pepsid, like chewable Pepsid tablets. It's the street name's called famotidine, right? Been chasing this dragon for a long time. Pepsid, chewable Pepsid tablets. Like, they have pill forms, and those are good too, but it's a chewable. Like, listen, heartburn, acid indigestion, whatever it is that ails you, these things will take care of. Chewable Pepsid tablets, right? Problem with these things is, like, they're not cheap. Like, and if you go through a lot of them, as Lori and I tend to do, because, like, we're together in this, we've been chasing this dragon for a long time, but we learned a lesson a couple years ago. We went to this concert, and we'd gone out to eat, and we were about to go into this concert, and we were both, like, we were hurting, heartburn, indigestion, whatever, and we needed some Pepsid. And so we're like, okay, well, let's go to the drugstore over there. So we go in this, it was a gas station, convenience store, the only store around, and we looked, and the only thing they had was this generic brand of Pepsid. It had the famotidine in it, again, which is the like, that's the magic elixir. That's what it's called, famotidine. But it wasn't the Pepsid name. And so, well, what difference could it be? So we bought it. We took this generic Pepsid. We took a couple bites of it, and like it was the most horrible, vile thing ever. Like, if you have ever tried a generic version of something, some of them are okay. But like, not this. I mean, it was chalky and gritty. It was like cardboard flavored chalk. Like, that's really what it tasted like. It was just this generic, cheap substitute for the real thing, and it was just horrible. Well, that's what I think we do. In our culture, we are surrounded by cheap substitutes for God. They might shine, they might glisten, they might gleam, but they're just cheap substitutes for the living God. And every once in a while, maybe as we're pursuing these other gods, these other idols, we think to ourselves, surely this whatever it is, can't be all there is. I can't quite put my finger in it, but I know this can't be all there is. That's because we've settled for something other than God, other than the real thing to satisfy us, to bring us hope, to provide the ultimate real meaning for our lives. We've gone chasing after other idols. And so God addresses again idolatry over and over again, and he speaks to the people again through the prophets, warning them about where this is leading them and what is going to happen to them. And so he says to Ahab through the prophet Elijah, and I'm in 1 Kings 18 and 19 here, but Elijah says, listen, Ahab, this is what God says. A drought is going to come. You've been warned. There's not going to be rain. There's not going to be even dew on the ground. And you're going to see finally who the real God is. Again, they worship primarily the god Baal, and he was again predominantly thought to control the weather. And so he was very, very dominant in their thinking as the god of rain. And so it's interesting, I don't know if you catch this, but you see what God is doing. He's withholding his blessing in the area of their lives that they had elevated to a God status so much that they were worshiping a false god. They're worshiping basically the God of rain. So God's like I'm going to withhold the rain. I'm going to withhold the rain. I don't think we ought to be surprised when there's a drought in our life that matches up perhaps with something that has become equal to God in our hearts. We ask God to bless an area of our life that's more important to him, and he's just maybe not going to do that most often. Instead, what he's going to do is withhold his blessing in that area. He's not going to send the rain. He withholds it. Now, I do believe the opposite is also true. It's not a guaranteed formula, but we do see this in Scripture that when we put God in his rightful place, we shouldn't be surprised to look up to the sky and feel the rain start to fall. But oftentimes I wonder, when God is not on the throne of our hearts, when things are out of order, when life doesn't seem to be working the way it should, that he withholds things from us so that he might get our attention and restore him to his rightful place, the seat of glory in our lives. When our primary commitment and passion, energy, and resources go to him, and then things start to fall in place again. So Elijah says to King Ahab, there's going to be this drought. And then Elijah basically sets up a cage match between the Lord and these false gods. And this is a pretty famous story. You have probably heard it. So in 1 Kings 18:19, Prophet Elijah says, now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel. And bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent word through all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, How long will you waver between two opinions? And then he says this, if the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. And then we read these words. It said, but the people said nothing. I think that's interesting. Why did they say nothing? I think it's because they wanted both. If they just wanted God exclusively, they'd have said, we choose God. We choose the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if they would have wanted Baal, they would have said, we choose Baal. But they said nothing because they wanted in their minds what was a little benefit from both. They were kind of vacillating. They were wavering. And so the people said nothing. And the stage is set. They gather together on Mount Carmel. Elijah gives instructions. Verses 25 and 28, he says, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first. Elijah says, since there are so many of you, call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bowl given to them and they prepared it. And then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, oh, answer us, they shouted, but there was no response. No one answered. Let me ask you a question. Why was it that when they were shouting to Baal and calling upon his name, why did nobody answer?
He's not real.
He's not real. Thank you. Like I was scared. I told this story in a sermon, I don't know, a few years ago, and asked that same question, and nobody knew, evidently. Nobody said anything, so I appreciate that. He's not real. Sometimes we can be confused on this. When we talk about false gods, we sometimes think, okay, well, they're not the one true God, but there is an entity. No, there's not. That's just what the people thought. So nothing was said. All right? And so there they are. They're shouting, they're dancing around, they're just doing everything they can do. And Elijah, he's taunting them. Like Elijah is there talking trash to them. It's him against all these prophets of this false God. And he's like yelling at them. Like Elijah, like, hey, maybe he doesn't hear you. Maybe you need to shout louder. Maybe he's deep in thought. Maybe he's busy. Don't know how it might put this in your scriptures, but if you were to read literal part of the Hebrew version of this, it literally says, Elijah said to them, maybe your God is using the bathroom. Like that's what it says. Maybe he's relieving himself, all right? Like, don't get offended. That's just what the Bible really says in the Hebrew language, of which, as you know, I'm an expert, not. But he's just like talking trash. He's taunting them. And it says that they shout louder. And then it says they slash themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Until their blood flowed. What a tragic scene. They're trying to get the attention of this false god. And they're bleeding for these gods, hoping that will be enough, hoping that will satisfy these vengeful, vindictive, horrible gods if they slash themselves. We think about that and we think, oh, that looks ridiculous. That's so primitive, bleeding for these idols. I can't imagine anybody would ever do anything like that. But we're not that different. Maybe we don't cut ourselves and bleed for our idols, but we do many, many other things in service of idols that we tend to allow in our lives, and we suffer every bit as much damage as that. Bleeding for their idols. But again, nothing happened. So Elijah, finally it's his turn. He has a trench dug around the altar. He puts wood on the altar. He puts all kinds of water in it, drenches it in gallons of water, thinking like when God starts that fire now, it will undoubtedly be God, because how could, with all this water, he probably had to carry the water in from somewhere else. I don't know where he got it because there was this drought, but this thing was drenched. And he says a simple prayer in verse 36. Contrasting to all the gyrations and all the stuff that the prophets of Baal were doing, he says this simple prayer. O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all of this at your command. O Lord, answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have brought them back to yourself. Basically, Elijah is saying, God, don't do this for me. Don't do this so that I will be the winner, so that I will look victorious, so that I will look more powerful. But do this so that they and everybody else will know that you and you alone are the only living God who is worthy of worship. Don't do this for my revenge. God, do it for your glory, to draw people back to you. And it says in verse 38, immediately when he prayed, immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burnt up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and even licked up all the water in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground, and they cried out, the Lord, he is God. Yes, the Lord, he is God. And once again, the story is about the returning of God's rightful glory, that it only belongs to him. See, we need to understand that idolatry, like not only is it just offensive to God, but here's the thing, it's like it hurts him, right? Like it hurts him because God loves us. And because he loves us, the Bible says he is a jealous God. He is jealous for our hearts. But he hurts when we go straying after false things that we think hold the answer to life, love, happiness, whatever it might be, when it's not him. At the end of the story, or at the end of chapter 15 in the story, we read about a prophet named Hosea. Love the story of Hosea. Hosea is told to go marry a prostitute named Gomer. She might have had a cousin named Goober, I don't know, but a prostitute named Gomer. Now that's an odd request if you're a preacher, right? Go marry a prostitute. Like that seems strange enough, but again, Gomer, like That's really weird. And so anyway, he goes and he finds this prostitute, and she's kind of in the bad part of town, the red light district, and he buys her from her handler, and he takes her home and he marries her, and life seems to be okay. And doesn't make any sense to Hosea the prophet, but he's obeyed God, and God's blessing them, and everything seems to be okay. And then if you know the story, you know that one day he comes home and Gomer's nowhere to be found. And he looks, he can't find her, and the thought occurs to him, maybe she's gone back to her old life. And he's kind of short of breath. He doesn't know what to do. He's a little panicky, but he goes back down to where he first found her, and there he sees his wife on the street, in the corner with her arms around another man, and she's leading him into this house. Hosea he's devastated. If you read the story, he's hurt. He's heartbroken. He's devastated. He's not even really angry. He's just hurt. He says, God, what am I supposed to do now? Like you told me to marry this woman, and I did. Now look what's happened. What am I supposed to do now, God? God says, okay, here's what I want you to do. This is what he says to the prophet. I want you to go back. I want you to buy her a second time. I want you to show her your unconditional love again, and I want you to bring her back to your home. And Hosea's got to be thinking, what? God, why would I do that? And we have the answer in Hosea 3:1. God says, I want you to do that so that the people will know how much I love them. You see, this was a living illustration of God's relationship with his covenant people. That God loves us not based on what we do or don't do. And even though the nation of Israel, the nation of Judah, and even us as the new people of God, we tend to chase after things. And yet God will take us back. If we would turn to him, if we would leave our ways behind, God will take us back because he loves us. God said, do this so that people will finally understand that I love my people, not based on what they do, not based on how pleased I am with them, but because of my covenant love. I covenant to love my people, and I will take them back. No matter how far astray they go and how often, if they would come back to me, I will love them. And see, we have offended God. We've hurt God when we allow other things, when we allow other people to become more important than him. We kind of push him. We push him down and we push him off the throne of our life. He becomes not a priority. And if we're not careful, what we can do is we can come here for an hour or two on Sundays, and that's great, and we need to do that. But then we can leave this place and we can forget about him. We can push him down. We can go into other temples of other gods and just kind of forget that we have a God who loves us so much that he takes us back, that he made us to love him, and yet we are sinful people. But God would say, I want you back. I still love you with all my heart. So the warning from the prophets is there is nothing and no one else that is to sit on the throne of your heart other than Yahweh, the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if there is something else, or if there is someone else that you've asked God to share your heart with, you need to repent of that sin, and you need to put God back where he belongs, invite him back onto the throne of your heart. Again, this is the message of the prophets to the people of Israel. It's the message of God to us. The good thing is that we have something that the Old Testament people of God didn't have. That we have another living example of how much God loves us. That he sent his only son to die for us, to give his life as a sacrifice for our tendency to sin and to wander and to worship at the throne false idols of other things. But he took that sin upon himself. And with that, once and for all, God says, this is how much I love you. And so we need to make sure that we are examining ourselves, and whenever we sense that maybe God has been replaced by something else, we need to put him back and repent. We need to listen to this warning. I've searched my heart. I want to invite you to do the same, and just turn back to him if you find that you need to.